Welcome everybody. My name is Tim Jakes. This is the IPMA-USA periodic webinar series, the dialogue series. We are pleased to have everybody here. Today's speaker is Dr. Meg Infiorati, and her presentation is If There's No I in Team, Who's Sitting at the Table? We are super pleased to have Meg back. Meg is on the board of IPMA-USA. And I want to tell everyone that there's a lot going on in IPMA-USA. We just had elections, and those results were emailed out to all members. If you're not a member, please go check us out at IPMA-USA.org. It's a real honor to have Meg here today. Before Meg gets started, let's take a quick minute and just review. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the questions section of the panel. As well, we will be doing polls. So let's, without further ado, Meg, let me turn this over to you.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're calling from. We often have people from all over the world attending. As Tim said, my name is Meg Infiorati. I have a PhD in organizational psychology, and my focus within the IPMA world often tends to be and leans towards the behaviors of individuals and how they either help or are a detriment to organizational process, of which project management, project process, and program management, portfolio management are all parts. So I've decided that this summer what we would talk about is the issue of who's sitting at your table. We've all been in the situation where we are sitting in a conference room and at some point we ask ourselves, probably silently in our head, what am I doing here? Or why is that person here? And often those are not discussions in your head that are centered around the topic of discussion or the issue that's being discussed. It has a lot to do with the areas that we're going to talk about: personality types, leadership styles, conflict styles, and how they affect you, not only the project, but how they affect you and your participation within that project. So when we talk about today's presentation, it's going to be a discussion, as you see, on why personality, leadership style, and conflict style can affect every aspect of projects, past, present, and future, which is an interesting concept because you don't think about the past projects as having an effect on future projects or current. So let's see where we go today. Let me get down a page. Hold on just a second. I've got a... Okay, so if there's no I in team, and we ask who's sitting at the table, we first want to ask ourselves one question. That question is, in any given day, who do you spend the most time with? Tim's going to pop up an answer, pop up a poll, and these are questions that can be answered both from your home life or your work life. So Tim, you want to pop up that poll for me?
Okay, the poll has launched, and if you take a minute and fill that out, the question is, in any given day, whom do I spend the most time with? I'll just give everyone a quick minute here to complete it.
And as a grammar person, it would be, with whom do I spend the most time?
Thank you, Meg. See what you get at IPMA-USA? Not only do you get project management, teamwork, but you also get a little bit of grammar. Okay, poll is closing right now. We're going to close the poll. And let me just read the responses very quickly. 13% said boss, 10% said coworkers, 50% said children, 15% said spouse, and 12% said dog or cat. Interesting.
Yes. Well, therein lies one of the dilemmas that we face in our world. If you said your spouse or your boss, your coworker, your children, there are certain situations, very minor, where that actually may be the case. In the case of your spouse, it means you probably work with your spouse. Case of your boss, you might be an assistant to your boss and you're with them all the time. Your coworker might be somebody in a cubicle with you. Your children, perhaps you're a stay-at-home dad that works online, and stay-at-home mom works online and manages projects from afar. Perhaps it's your dog or cat if you have no spouse or children. The real answer, though, to all of this is that you spend more time in your own mind than with any other person. If you think about it, you are constantly talking to yourself all day. Now, you're not conscious of it. That's one of the beauties of the brain, is that it does silence it from our active conversational process, but things are going on in your head all the time. It could be things as simple as, what am I going to do next? How do I answer this particular email? The phone is ringing. I'm going to pick it up and answer it. But in addition to that, within your subconscious, answers to other questions are going on, such as, we had a meeting a week ago and there's been no output from that meeting, and that was a really important meeting. Maybe I should be checking on that. Or, next week I'm going on vacation, so my brain is sitting on the beach in Hawaii, perhaps on a surfboard floating around. It could be anything. You're constantly with yourself more than you are with any other person. And the reason that this is important is because when we talk about who's sitting at the table, the likelihood is you're actually in your own mind far more than you are paying attention to what's going on at the table. When we look at what goes on at the table, however, we end up realizing that what's in our mind is only partly having to do with the task at hand. So whether it's deciding on a plan, some resources, perhaps a direction, your brain is more often attending to what do you see, which are behaviors, and what do you feel, which are the emotions at the table. We're going to talk about how you can separate those things out, recognize them, and use them to your benefit when you're in a team process. So just a very quick history of that phrase, because a lot of people are out there saying, yeah, we know there's no I in team, and a lot of people use this. It actually was a sports analogy used back in the 60s by a commentator during a, if I recall, baseball game. And the reason that it was used was because at the time there was the concept of triple plays and the concept of bunting in order to advance a player to another base. So in fact, for them to be a cohesive winning team, they did have to each know what the other person was doing, and they each had to do their part as part of the team. Hence, this is where this phrase actually comes from. But just like many phrases and words in history, we have absconded with that in the business world. We borrowed this phrase, and in fact, it was quite popular at a time when people were becoming remote workers. It was very popular when people would telecommute or when people began to do so much traveling. And when I say that, prior to the 1990s, air travel was very expensive, so you didn't hop on a plane for a meeting. Today, most companies don't think twice about hopping on a plane to go to a meeting because airfares can be found for very inexpensive amounts on websites like Kayak and things like that. So we look at this issue of there's no I in team in relation to the history of the time that it was being used and abused by the business community. But just so we understand each other, a whole lot of words have been sort of stolen. Bad now means good, right? That's bad. That actually means good to some people. Sick. Obviously now these days when you hear the word, hey, that's really sick, it means really amazing. A tool. We all have heard that. We probably all used it. So when you say a tool, it's not talking about the hammer. It often means someone who you consider is not intelligent enough to realize that maybe they're being used or being taken advantage of. They're a tool. I'm sure there are many, many more you can think of, but key to this original phrase was that no player in a team could win a game by themselves. And technically, while that's true, and it is true as well, in that a single member of a team cannot complete the project by themselves, we do have to remember that a team accomplishes nothing. Individuals on the team collectively create product that is the solution or is an output. So that's where we get the I. It's the individual. When we look at this, we want to take a close look at each I on our team. We want to basically look at each person as a unique individual. They each have unique skills, experiences, knowledge that they're bringing to the table. They come with unique brains and thinking styles. And that's a really important aspect, especially when you are developing a team, because you can actually walk down a path of something called groupthink, which means that people who come to the table all think the same way. And that can be dangerous because you don't become creative, you don't often get the best solution, the best overall outcomes. So we all have unique brains and thinking styles. We have unique logic and reasoning styles. And that's important because people will jump to conclusions in different ways. They also jump to very different conclusions with the exact same facts at the table. So we have to recognize that unique logic and reasoning processes will play a part in any team process. There are unique approaches to processing information. So some people look at the sky and say it's blue, some people will say it's blue-gray, some people will say it's blue-white. It all depends on their perception, their perspective. It's how do they process what it is they see or hear. Obviously as well, smell, touch, and taste, the other areas, but primarily in business, what we see and what we hear. So we have to remember that each of us are unique, and that is the value that comes to the table when we say there's no I in team. So when we talk about uniqueness, we want to recognize that there are primarily three areas of uniqueness that come out in a team environment. The first is personality type. Now, personality type is not a new topic of discussion. It's as old as Hippocrates, who studied it back in 400 BC. There were Roman physicians. There's philosophers. You might have heard of Immanuel Kant. In the more modern day sense of the concept of personality type, we look at Alfred Adler, who was a psychiatrist, and he studied the science of psychology from a psychiatric perspective. And he created, or at the time he was studying this, they created a specialized field of psychology called personality psychology. This is all about individual differences in characteristic patterns of thinking, of feeling, and most importantly, of behavior, because behavior is what we see and often what we respond to when we're sitting at that table in that team. So the study of personality focuses on two very broad areas. One is the individual differences, in particular personality characteristics, such as sociability or irritability. But the other area of personality focuses on how the brain learns, is motivated, and acts, meaning actually does something. The second area, just pop that up there. The second area is is leadership style. Leadership style refers to, as you can see, the manner and approach of providing direction, implementing plans, and how we motivate others. Kurt Lewin is probably the most well-known. Okay, thank you, Tim, and welcome everybody. This is the July webinar for within our dialogue series. We host them monthly, except in the summer when we do take a break in June because we've just held our elections. I think Tim was going to talk about that. He'll talk about that at the end of our program. And then also in August when we do a lot of planning. But we'll be starting up again in September, and look forward to having you come back again for the 2016-17 series. So my seminar today is all about who's sitting at your table. I am an organizational psychologist, and most of my attention to IPMA is on the people aspect of who's in the project. So today what we're going to talk about is how personality types, leadership styles, conflict styles can affect all of the different aspects of projects, all of those in the past, those in the present that you're working on, as well as those that you may be assigned to in the future. We talk about the past, and a lot of people think, oh, the project's done and over with. It can come back to bite you if we don't understand who was at the table. So one of the reasons I put in past, present, and future is because I want to help prepare you for what may be coming down the line for you in the future. So if there's no I in team, who's sitting at the table? One of the things that we always say is, or that we ask our people to do, is to ask themselves this one big question. In any given day, who do I spend the most time with? Okay, so I'm going to ask Tim to put up a poll, and you're going to go ahead and select that. And technically it should be, with whom do I spend the most time? But I think you understand the question. So in any given day, with whom do you spend the most time?
Okay, so if everybody online could take a few minutes and just complete the poll. We'll take about 30 seconds or 45 seconds to get this poll going. Results are pouring in right now, literally, Meg. You would be amazed. Yeah, so this is great. And I can just give you all a preview right now that dog and cat is pretty low on the list. So if anybody has a dog and cat, I would urge you to think of them. I don't want to influence the results here. I'll give you another 5 seconds here. Okay, and I'm going to close the poll and just share the results really quickly. So look at that. 17% spend the most time with their boss, 50% with coworkers, 33% spend the most time with their children. Nobody spends the most time with their spouse or partner, and nobody spends the most time with their dog or cat. So there you go.
Okay. So the reason we ask this question, and we take a look at, who did you say? Was it your spouse, your boss, your children, your co-workers, your dog or cat? The reason we ask this question is because it is actually none of the above. The real answer is yourself. You spend more time in your own mind than with any other person. One of the reasons this is important is because you are both thinking and having conversations on an ongoing basis. For example, I'm thinking, well, what am I going to say next? My phone might be ringing. I might pick up the phone and answer the phone and have a conversation. An email might pop up and I want to read it and go ahead and type in an answer. That's this active portion of what you're doing when you're sitting at the table. So I'm reading a page that somebody's handed out at the table, or I'm listening to a speaker in a presentation mode, for example. But what is actually going on in your mind to a much greater extent is what's going on in your subconscious. What goes on in your subconscious are things like, we had a meeting about this last week and nobody came up with any new ideas, so why am I sitting in another meeting with the same people listening to the same information? Now, you're not going to verbally say that, and you're probably not going to hear that from other people until perhaps we get very frustrated, but it is going through your mind. What also is going through your mind is you have a trip scheduled. Maybe it's a vacation. What are you going to do on vacation? Are you packed? Do you have to go to the store and pick up some supplies? What else might be going on in your head? My child has a test today in math and they were really doing poorly. I hope they do well today. So much is going on in your mind. It sort of floats in and out very briefly, and you think about it and you realize I can do nothing about that right this minute. So it typically just floats back down into the subconscious. But you spend far more time thinking about all of these flowing aspects of your life than what is right in front of you. What's right in front of you is going very slowly. Sometimes it happens very fast. You think it's really going fast, but technically in your brain it's going at snail speed because our brains are working in they call them nanoseconds. Decisions are made, thoughts are processed, memories are made. So what we want to make sure we think about is that, or that we consider all the time, is that you are probably what we call easily distracted, not because you are at fault in any way, but because that is how the brain works. Okay. So just to give a quick background on why I use, if there's no I in team, who's sitting at the table, is because the first original usage of this was used by a commentator back in the 60s when they were at a baseball game. And the concept was, at that time, the concept of triple plays in baseball, bunting in order to advance a player to the next base. These types of actions required that each member of the team participate in a way that helped other people on the team perform their jobs. So the no I in team meant that you could not do both the bunting and the advancing to another plate. You were there as a part of a cog in the large set of wheels that have to turn. So the commentator's use of this relative to the baseball game is actually quite accurate. A team of people playing a game of baseball can only win or lose if they take action. However, a business absconded with this term in the 80s, and they used it in a way they thought was motivating, and they thought was used in a way to pull people together to achieve a common goal. And in some cases, that is the way it was used and how many people did take it. But like most phrases, it became not only outdated, but overused and almost abused, because what it converted into was a loss of individual challenge, individual recognition. Individual accountability was also lost because we became a team, and the team did everything. However, just to close this topic out, when we've absconded with a whole lot of words these days, and things have changed meaning. So just some examples. Bad now means good if you're a kid. Sick means it's really amazing. And you think about that and you hear that word, oh, that's sick, and you're like, what are they talking about? Well, they really mean that that's amazing. When somebody is called a tool, and I often think about these in the terms of television and movies, when someone is called a tool, of course that is not the hammer or the screwdriver or the nail anymore. It's basically referring to somebody who's not intelligent enough to realize that they're being used or being taken advantage of. I'm sure there are many, many more, but the key to this original phrase, and the reason we use it in the organizational psychology world to introduce this subject, is because we understand that no player on a team could win the game by themselves. And technically, that is also true with teams in a business world. No one person can typically do all jobs on a team and complete the project by themselves successfully. I think we understand that, but it brings up an interesting dilemma. So how do we return to the concept of, as we talked about, individual recognition and accountability while we retain the functional aspects of being a team to achieve something? Well, one of the ways we do that is we have to look at the uniqueness of each individual. Okay, so if there are only I's in team, each one is a unique individual with unique skills, experiences, and knowledge. They have unique brains and thinking styles. And the reason this is important is because people approach problems differently. They're going to utilize their background, their experience differently. You need to have multiple types of brain and thinking styles on your team, or you can easily end up in something that's called groupthink. Excuse me. Groupthink is when everybody on the team pretty much thinks the same way, and they arrive at a conclusion, but you don't have the best solution. What you have is a solution that everybody glommed onto and decided was a great solution. So we do need unique brains and thinking styles. When we talk about that there are only I's in the team, we think about unique logic and reasoning processes. So logic and reasoning processes must be varied on your team because, not must be, but are varied on your team. And you see this when people jump to conclusions very quickly and others jump to different conclusions when in fact the same facts are on the table. You haven't changed any of the information. The dynamics of the group haven't changed, but people quickly jump to different conclusions because they have different logic and reasoning processes that they utilize. Another area we want to take a look at is the unique approaches to processing information. So a lot of people will do things like see a tree and someone will say it's a tree with branches, it's green, it's tall, it's short. How we process the information that we see is something that's important because what you see and what I see may be two different things, and they also will then have two different meanings for us. So now when we sit as a team at a table, the problem is you're thinking red, I'm thinking blue. Those are two very unique and distinct colors, and therefore we're probably not going to be on the same path to the same solution for a particular, in this case, project. So the good news is we are each unique. The better news is a good team takes advantage of all that uniqueness. And the best news is that it's natural because that's just the way human nature built all of us. So why is it important that we recognize this uniqueness? And this is something that tends to get lost because we are all so focused on getting the job done that we forget that we're all individual people. So we look at three areas primarily from an organizational psychology perspective within the business world. The first is personality type, leadership style is second, and conflict style is third. When we talk about personality type, I'll just pop up here what that is. Personality type's been around for thousands of years. Hippocrates is considered the founder of the concept of personality type. He was a philosopher in the 400 BC time frame. But personality type has been looked at from different perspectives. Physicians have looked at it. That's specifically when they would be looking at brains and why did people do things one way versus another way. That goes back as far as 160 AD, so obviously almost 2,000 years ago. Immanuel Kant, you might have heard of, he's a philosopher. He looked at it from the perspective of morals and values and how people approach those things from a personality perspective. In the modern day, we tend to look at Alfred Adler. He was a psychiatrist, and he helped to both push forward but also really identify the field of science called psychology uniquely and distinctly from psychiatry. So much so that he and some other colleagues ended up creating a specialized field called personality psychology. Personality refers to the individual differences in the characteristic patterns, as we read here, of thinking, feeling, and behaving. Behaving being the most obvious one. We watch other people behave. We focus in personality styles on two areas rather. One is understanding individual differences in the particular personality characteristics, things like sociability, irritability. But the second is on how people's brains actually work. How do they hear and store information? How do they listen? How do they create memories? How do they bring forward motivational information for themselves, because this is your brain? And then the other aspect of that is what do we do with that? What do we use for decision making? So there's the actual physiological aspect of personality type. The second area we look at, as I said, is leadership style, which basically has to do with how we provide direction to people, how we implement plans, and how we motivate other people. So remember, personality type was self-motivation. Leadership style is motivation of others. This area of study typically goes back to about the 1939, 1940 area when Kurt Lewin, who is the most well-known assessment developer for leadership styles, studied this topic based on psychology, but he also actually studied it in the field of business, as well as what became the focus at that time, which was the military. And the focus on the military, of course, is because World War II was gearing up and becoming quite needful of psychological approaches. So leadership style is that manner and approach of providing direction, implementing plans, and motivating others. When we look at that by employees or from the employee perspective, it includes that total pattern of explicit and implicit actions that are performed by their leader, whoever they think their leader is. It's the entire gamut of everything they do explicitly and implicitly. And we watch that, and sometimes we model our behavior after that. Sometimes we shy away from that behavior. Depends on the leader. I think if anybody's watching the Republican National Convention over the last couple of days, there are a few people that you would gravitate towards and a few people you'd gravitate away from. These are the things that you see. As I said, this is the behavior of certain people and how we recognize and utilize that as the individual characteristics of a person. Finally, we look at conflict styles. On a team, conflict styles, there are dozens of conflict style assessments out there. I like Blake and Moulton. They were the first to present this conceptual scheme for classifying modes or styles for handling interpersonal conflicts. There were 5 types that they found. You can force, in a conflict, you can force an answer. You can withdraw from the question. You can smooth things over for everyone else. You can compromise so that everybody wins a little, everybody loses a little. And then there's simply just the flat-out thinking process of problem solving. Those typically are the 5 conflict styles. They're called by many different names depending on who wrote the assessment. But it's been studied quite in depth since the late 1960s. In general, the conflict management is the practice of being able to identify and handle conflicts in a sensible, fair, and efficient manner. Since conflicts in a business are a natural part of the workplace, it's important that there are people who understand conflicts and know how to resolve them. And this is where we tend to get lost in a team. Because on a team, you often don't have a human resources person or an organizational development person. On most teams, you have technical type people and perhaps functional people such as finance or sourcing or contracting. But you often don't have somebody whose main job is to assure that everybody on the team is moving forward. And that's basically handling those conflicts. So those are the 3 things that we look at when we look at uniqueness. I'll just throw a question out. Any questions so far? Any comments? Tim?
I'm not seeing any questions so far. Let's keep going.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and take a look at personality type. Now, what I'm going to ask is that as we talk about these, think about yourself, and I want you to think about one person in your world, whatever. Could be family, could be friend, could be foe, could be a coworker, whatever. Think about yourself and one other person. And I want you to think about whether or not they are like one of these columns or dislike one of these columns. So when we look at personality type, I tend to use the Myers-Briggs wording because it makes it very clear, although there are others. But these are very clear, distinctive words and descriptions of how you typically behave or have attitudes. So attitudes are used by everyone, but one is usually preferred and developed over the other. So when we look at this, people who have a preference for extraversion, or they're called extroverts, this is all about where do you get your energy and where do you get your essential stimulation from the environment. Is it the outer world of people and things, or do you get your energy and your stimulation from the inner world? If it's the outer world, you're typically an extrovert. You thrive on the chaos, as we say. You love that a lot is going on around you. If you're an introvert, you tend to be much more inwardly focused, and you process internally. So we look at some words that describe each. Extroverts tend to feel pulled outward. They are energized by others. They tend to act and then think about what they did. They're friendly and talkative. They're usually the center of, or at least a member of, groups that are converging in order to talk about whatever. Could be around the cooler talking about last night's TV show or in a meeting. They tend to express their thoughts and emotions very freely. They do need a lot of interaction. They like being with people, talking with people. They tend to think out loud, as we say. If you recognize any of those in yourself or your opposite, just keep those things in mind, because what you're looking at is something that will cause conflict in a meeting. Extroverts tend to be very breadth-oriented. They can appear shallow, but basically they're looking at this huge, large, big picture. If you're an introvert, it's pretty much the opposite. You tend to push inwards. You think internally in your brain. You're energized from within. You create your own energy. You reflect a lot, and then finally you act, which of course can bother some people, because those who act and then reflect have already done the deed. The thing is already done. When they look at somebody who's an introvert who reflects then acts, often they think they are not participating, perhaps. They sometimes think that they're being ignored by the introvert who's thinking. There are different manifestations of that behavior, but those are the most common. They tend to be reserved and quiet because they're often internally thinking about whatever is going on. So in a meeting, the topic is being discussed. People are quite quiet, a few of them. They're typically introverts. They're hearing everything, but they're processing it internally instead of speaking about it. They typically need some privacy. They often will exit a group and come back later, and people say, "Where have you been?" And they'll give you some answer like, "Oh, no, I've just been around." They needed a little bit of time to re-energize, because they can re-energize from within in a quiet environment. The thing about an introvert that's unique from an extrovert is that they are into the depth of an issue. Extroverts are into the breadth of an issue. Now, the most important thing here is if you have both extroverts and introverts on a team, and you can recognize this, you will get the broadest possible solution, and you will have thought about it as deeply as you possibly can. And I believe that you would agree that that is the best solution. If you had just extroverts, you'd have 100 different potentials and possibilities, but no real depth to any of them. If you had just introverts, you might have one or two solutions, very, very well defined, very, very deep, but only one or two. So it takes both sides of this particular personality type to be able to have a good quality solution. When we look at another area, sensors. I'm going to go through these a little quicker because you see where I'm going with this. For sensors, these are ways of perceiving and taking information, and this is how do you recognize information? So again, one is preferred. It's not that you can't be both. It's that one is typically preferred. It's what you naturally gravitate towards. If you're a sensor, you like the details. You're in the present. Things are practical. You like the facts. You like things in sequence. So you're building a bicycle at Christmas for your child. You take the directions out and you follow the directions, because your assumption, and you're normally right, is that the person who designed the book that goes with the bicycle usually is pretty right on what step follows which step. Doesn't always happen with all directions, but typically that's what technical writers are trying to do. So sequential. They like directions. They're very good with repetition. Enjoyment is something that tends to come from sensors. They like that they can touch, taste, feel, see whatever it is that's right in front of them. We talk about perspiration versus anticipation. Perspiration is I'm doing, I'm doing, I'm doing. I'm getting it done. These are sensors. They want to do it, get it done now. They tend to be, they tend to conserve, and we say conserve as opposed to inspiration. They conserve what we know today. They don't let a lot of fluff in because that distorts what the solution is. They conserve what they know. And then they're literal. I mean, when you say it's blue, they mean it's blue, not light blue, not dark blue, not sky blue, not navy blue. They mean blue. So they tend to be more specific. Also, we saw one of those earlier. Intuitors, on the other side, they tend to not look so much at details, but patterns. How have things happened in the past? How do things look like they're flowing now? They look at the future. What happens if we do this? They tend to be imaginative, but imagine the difference between imaginative and practical. If you only had imaginative people on the team, you'd have 1,000 grand ideas, none of which could actually ever be implemented, but you'd have 1,000 ideas. They tend to look at innovations. I apologize for the double R there. More random in their thinking. They tend to work on hunches more than specifics. They like a variety of options. They anticipate. We talked about that before, as opposed to looking at things. Look, this is what I have to do. This is what's here in front of me. I'm going to work it. They anticipate what's coming next. They're always looking at the what's coming next. They have no problem with change. For them, change is every day. For sensors, change is a little more difficult to take. They're also quite figurative. Okay, so that sounds about right. I think we can do that, but there's no real definition as you would get in a literal drawing, for example, if you were going to design a house as an architect. They're more figurative, where sensors tend to be literal. So you need both, because imagine if you have sensors on a team, all your sensors, all you're ever going to get is exactly what it says to do in the direction booklet. If you had only intuitors on the team, all you're going to get are 1,000 ideas, but you're never going to get that bicycle built. So you need both, and they balance each other. When we look at the issues of thinking and feeling, this is how we decide and evaluate information that comes in. People who are thinkers tend to use their head. They're very objective. They believe in justice. They're very cool, calm, collected, moving forward. Tend to be fairly impersonal because they don't look at these things as personal. They just look at these things as issues to be resolved. Critiques, they're very good at critiquing, sometimes to the point where other people want to take a 2x4 to them, but they're very good at critiquing. They analyze really, really well, often very deeply, sometimes too deeply. They're precise, and they believe in principles. When we look at the feelers in the world, when we say feelers, these are the people who think about decisions in the mode of how they will affect others. So they sort of make their decisions from the heart, as we say. Thinkers from the head, feelers from the heart. They're quite subjective, as opposed to very objective. These are the facts. They're quite subjective. Well, these are the facts in this context. They believe in harmony. They like the caring environment. They're very personal and personable. Two different words, but that's a person who has the feeler type preference. They appreciate things that go on, and they verbalize that quite often. Now, if you're an extrovert feeler, you will tell people how great a job they're doing. If you are an introvert feeler, you'll probably send people an email. You'll probably just send them an award, and you might not even talk about it, and that's okay. The key, though, is that if you have these combinations of people, sometimes you'll see odd behaviors and you think, wow, why would they ever do that? But now you're starting to see that these different factors and facets of a personality can affect every different behavior that you see. They tend to empathize very quickly, sometimes to their detriment, because they will take on other people's problems very quickly to their own demise. They can be persuasive, and they have the concept of values versus principles, which sometimes people mix up fairly easily, but principles are how are we going to proceed. Values are what is it that we are trying to say to the world with what we're doing. So with just thinkers in the room, all you're going to get are here are the facts, ma'am. This is what we're doing. This is the decision. Everybody move forward. That's kind of harsh. If you have just feelers in the room, you're going to have a whole lot of, well, what are we going to do about Mary? And what happens if we do this? And we're going to change the benefit, but we have 3 people who are pregnant, and we've got 1 person that needs to go out on family leave, and we've got vacation. You never get to a solution because they're so worried about all of the potential impacts that they don't decide. So you can see now where heavy decision about everybody needs to be jointly on a team. And finally, we'll just finish out with personality type. This is all about literally the attitudes of everyone's lifestyle, making those decisions. So judgers are organized, structured, controlled, decisive, deliberate, closure. They like closure. They plan. They have deadlines. They're productive. Typically, CEOs are what you see in the J category because that's what they do. I've got enough information. I'm now going to make a decision, and here's where we go. The opposite side of that are persuaders, or they call them perceivers. Here's perception. They're very flexible. They love the flow of things. They love the experience of making the decision more than the decision itself. They're very curious. The curiousness becomes what we call the devil's advocate. 1,000 new things end up in the discussion. They're spontaneous. They're open. They wait to hear what else could be. And I don't say anything else after the word could be because that's what it is to them. What else could be? Discoveries. They love, they're very receptive to all different ideas. Again, same thing. You can have very harsh, quick decisions, or you can have no decisions on the perceiving side. So you need both of those people at the table. Now, that is kind of a nutshell what personality type is. When I give actual personality type seminars, they take 3 days. They're very long. But the key is, were any of the characteristics not necessary on any team that you have been a member on? And that's really the question you have to ask yourselves. Have I been on a team where I didn't have one or more of those personality features? And the fact that I didn't have it, how did that affect the team's future? How did that affect the past? Because you may have made a decision that you then had to go back and revisit once, twice, maybe 3 times, because you didn't have somebody bringing that to the table because of their unique personality style. So it's just really important in personality type that we look at the combination of factors that make up people. Just, using this one little set that we've talked about, there are between 16 and 25 different types that you could have at the table. Now, does that mean you need that many people at the team? No. It just means that when you're missing a type, you want to try to bring that out in a discussion by setting yourself aside, your own personality aside, and saying, well, what would the thinker do in this case? What would the sensor do in this case? What would the introvert be thinking about in this environment? So the key to understanding the I in team and the values of the I's on the teams is that each brings a unique set of characteristics that assure the projects, the processes, and ultimately the results are well-founded, well-rounded, customer and employee and stakeholder focused, etc. All those things we want in project management. But wait, there's more, because I feel like I'm in a Ronco commercial sometimes. Let's see what happens when we integrate the complexity of leadership. And this is a fairly complicated slide, but I'll just pick a couple. So if there are typically, again, 4 types of leadership styles. Here we're using, again, same concepts, different words. Structural, human resource leadership style, a political resource style, or a symbolic. In a structural style, these leaders tend to focus on structure, strategy, environment, the implementation, maybe some experimentation, maybe some adaptation. If you're an I who's a structural leader, you follow the rules without discussion to get the job done. You've already thought it out in your head. Sometimes I's think that everybody is reading their mind. Now, if you're a structural I leader, all of a sudden, you've already got the entire plan done in your head. You're moving. Why is not everybody coming with me? Come on, do your jobs. And what you've forgotten is that you didn't tell anybody. You decided in your head, and you didn't tell anybody. E's, on the other hand, an E structural leader will tell everyone the rules constantly, so everyone is moving in the same direction. Now that's good because you're all moving in the same direction, but imagine that you've now heard the rules for the 5th time, the 9th time, the 700th time. Enough with the rules. Could we just all keep going forward? Okay, give us a reminder, but we don't need it every day. So you have to do some balancing there. But structural is all about structure and strategy and getting it done. Human resources, as you can imagine, they're all about empowering other people. So if you're an I, they're going to think about the plan, but they're only going to speak to a small group of people at a time, if that's the type of leadership style you use, human resources, and you're an I. If you're an E, you're going to want to talk, you're going to want everyone to talk and come to an agreement all at the same time, all about the same thing. And that is probably not any more achievable than thinking about the plan but only speaking to a small group at a time. So if you've played the game telephone, you know what I'm talking about. So one person says something to the next person, that person says it to a third, the third to the fourth, to the fifth, etc. And by the time you get to the end of the circle, you have an entirely different commentary. That is the problem with an HRI, because they'll talk to different groups, small groups at a time, and they all have different questions, and they're all hearing perhaps answers, even correct answers, but not everybody is hearing every question and every answer. So there's some dangers there in the HR side of being that leadership style that you have to consider for yourself as well as for your team members. Political leaders, they clarify what they want. The thing about a political leader is that they're interested in the distribution of power and interest. They build linkages and connections to other stakeholders that are one-on-one. And they're likely to use persuasion first. Hey, how about coming along with me on this journey? They'll go to negotiation, but if they have to, they're going into coercion. Look, you need to do this or it's your job. That's a very common political outcome, especially under stress. So again, we use just 2 of the personality indicators of I and E, introvert, extrovert. In political, with I, they're going to build one relationship. You're going to build a relationship one at a time, and they just sort of expect other people to constantly follow. Well, that's really hard because you don't know what that relationship is. You don't know how it was created. You don't know what was agreed to. You don't know what the rules are. So it's very hard to follow that. If you're an E type personality and you are a political leadership style, you're going to tell everyone who is working with who and what should be done, which can be good until you become a dictator. That's just the outcome of that. Finally, there's the symbolic type leadership. These people use stories. They tell stories to capture attention, to get everyone to kind of come along and frame the reference of where we're going. They tend to discover and communicate some vision that we all can follow. Now, if you're an I with the symbolic style, you're going to use those relationships to help disseminate the stories and the rituals, and which is basically the rules and the regulations of getting the job done. The good news is it gets done. The bad news is, as an I, you now are not watching that typically anymore. You're letting other people tell the story. So sometimes you can lose control as a leader if you're an I and a symbolic leader. If you're an E and a symbolic leader, you're going to spend more time telling stories and you're never going to get the job done. That is the outcome, typically, if you're not careful. So we like to have the leadership styles understood. You use the appropriate one in the appropriate context and environment, and depending on your personality type, it will come out in different ways.
Meg, quick question from Christopher Benson. Are personalities learned behaviors or are they biological?
You have asked I'm going to tell you, it's the billion-dollar Nobel Prize winning question. This is the issue of nature versus nurture. There are two fields of thought, Christopher, and everybody. Some people do believe that it is nurtured, that you can develop your personality type. There are others, and many studies, that seem to show you are born with your personality type. Now, I want to be real clear. You may be born with your personality type, but you can learn how to be the other side, or the non-preferred side. And I'm going to give you an example. I'll use myself. I am a thinker. I'm a T. I am a T at the very end of the scale. That means that, in general, your feelings, your emotions, I don't care about. I make decisions. I think about the information and I move forward with either looking for more information or getting to the crux of the problem. That is how I spent the first probably 30 years of my life, and I'll tell you that I made a few enemies along the way. I learned how to be the feeling side, which is the opposite preference, the hard way. I learned the hard way. I, like a lot of people, had those very hard discussions with my boss, with employees, and my family too. I have a unique family, like everybody does. So you are typical. What the study, most of the studies now show, is that you're born with that, but that you develop the other sides and you use them when you need to. This is the maturity model of personality types.
Okay.
The key, though, is that when you use your non-preferred side, it just takes more energy from you. It's tiring. And so you can do it. And it's really exciting when somebody can, I won't say master, but certainly becomes proficient in using their opposite. But it often tires them out.
Meg, it's 4 o'clock. Okay, thank you. It's 4 o'clock. I know we got started a little bit late, so we'll probably end a little bit late. Maybe if we take another 7 to 10 minutes here.
No, I don't think we'll even need that, because we're going to hit conflict styles next.
Okay, so we'll so if everyone just can hang with it here, we'll keep going here. Thanks so much.
Yep. So the last and the third complicating factor is the issue of conflict styles. Now, I do have a quick poll. This is the hard part. When conflict occurs, let's assume every one of the team members are best buddies, right? Best friends. When a discussion occurs and two or more approaches, ideas, suggestions arise, how do people act? Which types of behaviors will you likely see? So, Tim, can you pull up that poll? What do you normally see at the table when a conflict occurs? And these are just 5. Trust me, there are hundreds of different behaviors, but I just picked 5 that you might have seen.
Yeah, I can think of a few choice ones that I see on a regular basis in New York City, particularly from cab drivers that are not on this list. But the question is, when there is a conflict, what do you typically do? Do you overtalk another person talking? Do you go silent? Do you leave the room? Do you hold a side conversation or engage in an argument with that person? So looking at the results, another 5 or 10 seconds here. And okay, I'm going to close the poll. Let's look at the results. So if there's a conflict going on, 20% overtalk another person talking. They raise their voice, perhaps. 20% just go silent and disengage. 0, leave the room. 40% would hold a side conversation. And for those of you on this call, if you're a project manager, you're undoubtedly a facilitator, and you see those side conversations all the time in meetings, I'm sure. So 40% of those of us respond with the side conversation, and then none of us would engage in an argument. We're all very reasonable people on this webinar. So there you go.
All very reasonable. I love that. All very reasonable on this seminar. However, you've probably seen that behavior because you've been at the end of the argument, maybe not the starter, but certainly the end of it. The point being is that we know who we are now, right? We've taken a look at our personality style, just very briefly. We know a little bit about our leadership style and maybe how that can affect our group based on our personality style. When you get into conflict, which is where the trouble always shows its ugly head. Always, always, always. When we get into conflict styles, we really have to understand how to manage a conflict. And again, I've used the Thomas and Kilman chart, but there are 1,000 different terms using describing conflict styles. In this case, we've got competing, collaborating, avoiding, accommodating, and compromising. So just running them real quick, an accommodating manager is one who cooperates to a high degree. Pretty easy. Whatever you say, yep, that sounds good, we can do that. Okay. This may be, at the manager's own expense because this is the wrong thing to do, but I'm agreeing just to get through. I'm being accommodating just to get through the argument. It could work actually against that manager's goals and objectives and desired outcomes, and that person or that project manager may end up taking the heat for something that, in order to avoid a conflict, they eventually, because they've accommodated somebody, they then take the heat for something not getting done. So this approach has its dangers, but it also can be effective when the other person is an expert or maybe they have a better solution. Being an accommodating manager is not a bad thing. It is something to a conflict manager. It's something to be used appropriately at the right time. When we look at avoiding an issue, that's one way a manager might resolve a conflict. I'm just going to avoid it. It doesn't exist. I'm going to live in my la-la land and ignore it. That conflict style doesn't help the other staff members reach their goals. It doesn't help the manager who's avoiding the issue, and it certainly cannot assertively, you can't assertively pursue the end of the project because you have avoided a stopping block. You're at a gate and you can't get the gate open because you're going to avoid it. So clearly some dangers there if that's your conflict style, but this can work well when the issue is trivial or when the manager has no chance of winning. You can sometimes just avoid it. If you have absolutely no chance of getting through this gate, you sometimes just need to put it aside. They call that avoiding. It's something you don't want to do very often, but it is a style. If that's all you did, though, you can imagine how dangerous that could be. Collaborating managers, they become partners or they pair up with other people to achieve goals. Now, it might be their goals, it might be the project's goals or the organization's goals, but this is how some managers can sort of break free from that win-lose paradigm that we hear about, or and try to achieve that win-win solution. I hate these phrases, but this is how we talk about business, right? So win-win is something that we want to achieve. But collaborating managers create enemies because you're literally building partnerships one-on-one with different people. So you're negotiating, but nobody knows what all the negotiations are. And when something comes out that was negotiated that nobody knew about, you can create an enemy. So there's a danger in being a collaborating conflict manager. But it can be effective when you have a very, very complex set of environments or scenarios where the managers really need to find some very unique, some very novel type solutions. Collaborating can be good. You just have to be very careful that you don't create a negotiated solution with somebody that conflicts with another negotiated solution. So there's competing. Obviously, this is win-lose. I'm going to compete, so somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. That manager acts in a very assertive way, again, to get their goals or their organizations or perhaps their project's goals. This happens an awful lot when it comes to resources in the project world. We compete for resources. There are only so many bodies that the company can hire to do the work at any given time. So competing becomes a very easy go-to conflict management style. Unfortunately, of course, it's very dangerous because while you're competing, you're not a getting your job done, but more importantly, you may be taking resources for something that's more important for the organization overall, or for a customer or stakeholder overall. It can be, however, very appropriate in times of emergencies when time is of the essence. Because when time is of the essence, you got to get it done, or the consequence is greater than the organization, the project, or the individual can absorb. So sometimes it can be of value. The last one is compromising, and I'm going to say something that you probably won't hear very often. A lot of people say that compromising is the best approach. I disagree with that terminology. Compromising, when we get to it, is one of 5. You use the most appropriate in the circumstances that you're in the context of the environment that you're in. That makes a better conflict manager than always being the compromising one. But a lot of papers have been written saying compromising is the ultimate goal, which is why, in most of these graphics, in this one, the Thompson-Kilmann, you'll see it in the center as, oh, it's the overlying, the best one. This is sort of but the thing about compromising is it's mostly looked at as a lose-lose scenario. Nobody gets everything they want, but everybody gets something they want. It typically requires a moderate level of assertiveness and cooperation. So you have to have a fairly mature conflict styles team as well. It's typically used, or it's most appropriate, I guess, when you're in a scenario or a situation where you need a temporary solution and both sides have equally important goals, right? So, okay, let's compromise to get through. We understand we both have some other issues we have to resolve, but we got to at least move forward. So it's very helpful, but if you compromised on everything, you would probably end up in the mediocre world. And that's where we end up leading to the, and I hate this number, but it still seems to be prevalent, the 60% of project failure status. Typically comes because we continue to compromise. So when we add, I just want to kind of give you a complexity nature now. When we add personality type and leadership style and conflict styles, interestingly enough, we are now at 125 potential combinations of how a team operates. 125 combinations. That's a bit mind-blowing, even for me sometimes, when I go into an organization and have to figure out what's going on with a team that is having issues. And I do this for a living, so for me it's a little bit much. For most people, they look at it and say, how do you ever get a team to work? But it all depends on who's on the team, how it's being led, and how the conflicts are dealt with. That's really the crux of project management. And teams without good understandings of these 3 very complex topics easily go astray. They can become dysfunctional, they become incommunicative, and as, again, the statistics clearly remain steady at 60% failure, you have a lot of unsuccessful environments, which are also unhealthy. Really important. This all goes back to health. The reason that these are so important is because we all want to be successful, and we all want everyone else to be success. Because everyone else's success is mine, mine is everyone else's. So when there's no I in team, and we look at who's sitting at the table, we want to make sure, just kind of to come to the closeout here, take the time to know who's on your team. Get to know them a little bit. Understand how they think, how they process information, how they make decisions. Understand what they're likely to gravitate towards as a leadership style, so that if you're the leader at any particular time in the team, you know that you can get their attention, keep them motivated, keep them a productive, happy part of the team. Getting to know them also from a conflict style. If something happens that you don't agree with, how do you like to deal with it? Ask the questions. Be open. These can be really productive conversations if you have them before you start. If you have them when the conflict has occurred, it's a little late, because everybody's emotions are already too raw. And nobody's paying attention to what are you trying to solve. Are we going to paint the house blue or red? Everyone's past that. That's not part of the discussion. We're all about the emotion of I like blue, I like red.
Mm-hmm.
Blue's too cold, red's too hot. That's what happens. So take the time to know who's on your team. Take the time to understand their approaches to their leadership and conflict. Not only their approaches, but how do they like to be led? How do they like to resolve a conflict? Set the rules early so that all the members of the team can figure out how they're going to fit into the rules stream. Okay? And then take advantage of that uniqueness of each eye. The good news is this particular presentation is online, or will be, I guess, as soon as Tim gets a minute to do that. So you'll be able to go back and take a look at each of those. I think there were like 6 slides that had some of the detail in them. But take a look at them and don't try to bring them into a meeting without talking to people about what that is. But you might want to go to your HR office and say, hey, you know, I just learned about this. How can we be a better organization? How can we be a better team? How can we arrive more successfully at our project goals? These are the types of things that have been missing historically, and now the new IPMA ICB4 does put a much more heavy emphasis, as well as the Project Excellence Baseline, on the people aspect, the behavioral aspect of people in project management. So I'm very happy as an organizational psychologist to know that project management has become much more open and embracing the people aspect of this. So that's where I'm going to bring it to a close and just ask if there are any questions, and if not, you can always write me in the future and ask a question.
Sure. Thanks, Meg. Thank you very, very much for taking the time, and I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. This is great information. And we always appreciate your unique perspective, Meg, and hope that you come back and do this again. A quick note for everyone. We will, hi back to you from Athens, Greece. We love having you on. Thank you so much. We are going to take a break for August and let everyone get through their holidays. In September, we will have a great webinar where we are talking about IPMA-USA and all the great things that's going on, and how you can get involved even if you're in Athens, Greece, or somewhere else. So we'd love to have everyone come back. We will be sending out invites for that webinar. That'll be in September, probably mid to late September, after all the kids get back to school and everything. So with that, I wish everyone a safe and healthy and happy rest of the summer. And we will see you in September. Have a great day. Thanks. Bye-bye.